How Bunker Hill Forged the American Army American Revolution documentary. The American Revolution began with the first shots at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, but it was the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of that year that marked a critical escalation. What had started as a series of regional skirmishes now evolved into an organized and strategic military campaign. This turning point was instrumental in shaping the foundation of the United States Army and marked the beginning of the nearly year-long siege of Boston. In our feature-length documentary, American Revolution, This is War. Bunker Hill and the Birth of the U.S. Army. History Hit commemorates the 250th anniversary of the Siege of Boston, 1775 to 1776, a defining moment in the Revolutionary War and the broader fight for American independence. Historian Dan Snow takes viewers deep into the events of Bunker Hill, the first major battle of the American Revolution. Though technically a British victory, it came at an enormous cost and signaled the resolve and resilience of the colonial militia. Through expert interviews and on-site investigation, Snow unpacks how this battle catalyzed a transformation from untrained colonial fighters into a unified military force capable of challenging the British Empire. After the early encounters at Lexington and Concord, British forces led by General Thomas Gage were effectively besieged in Boston. In response, thousands of colonial militiamen from across New England mobilized and surrounded the city. Lacking a formal command structure, but driven by shared purpose, these early American forces initiated what would become an 11-month standoff. Boston, both a strategic port and a symbolic hub of revolutionary fervor, became the center of this conflict. As the British clung to their position, the Battle of Bunker Hill erupted on June 17, 1775. Despite ultimately securing the battlefield, British forces suffered staggering losses, over 1,000 casualties, highlighting the tenacity of the American resistance and demonstrating that the revolution was far from a fleeting rebellion. Bunker Hill, the battle that changed everything. Understanding the tactical significance of Boston's surrounding high ground, colonial military leaders made a decisive move in June 1775. On the night of June 16th, approximately 1,000 militiamen, commanded by Colonel William Prescott, occupied and fortified Breed's Hill, an action mistakenly recorded in history as the Battle of Bunker Hill, though most of the fighting took place on Breed's Hill itself. Working under cover of darkness, the colonial forces hastily constructed earthen fortifications atop the Charlestown Peninsula. Their objective was clear: deny the British control of the high ground and threaten their stronghold in Boston. Come morning, British command recognized the threat. In response, Major General William Howe mobilized 2,200 seasoned regulars to launch a direct assault. The ensuing battle was brutal and relentless. Twice, the British forces advanced in tight formation, only to be repelled by disciplined and deadly colonial volleys. The American militia, though lacking in training, utilized the terrain and fortifications to devastating effect. The third British charge only succeeded because the defenders had exhausted their ammunition. Forced into retreat, the colonial fighters relinquished the hill, but not without exacting a shocking toll. Though technically a British victory, the cost was staggering. Over 1,000 British soldiers killed or wounded, including 226 fatalities. It was the highest casualty count suffered by the British in any single battle of the entire American Revolutionary War. In stark contrast, the colonial forces sustained around 450 casualties, with approximately 140 killed, most during the final moments of defense and retreat. As Dan Snow explains, this was a Pyrrhic victory of unprecedented scale. The tactical gain was irrelevant compared to the psychological and strategic losses incurred. The sheer number of casualties stunned British leadership, dispelling any remaining belief that the rebellion could be easily crushed. Instead of demonstrating dominance, the Battle of Bunker Hill became a harrowing warning. The colonial resistance was resolute, organized, and far more formidable than the Crown had anticipated. In a single day, the character of the American Revolution was forever changed. and the foundation of the American Army was forged in blood. The birth of an army and the long siege. The Battle of Bunker Hill marked a profound turning point in the American Revolution. For the colonial militias, the engagement served as a powerful morale booster. Despite lacking formal military training, they had withstood the assault of the British Army, then considered the most powerful military force in the world, and inflicted staggering casualties. This success, even in tactical defeat, proved that determined patriots could challenge British dominance on the battlefield. News of the battle spread rapidly throughout the 13 colonies, igniting a wave of revolutionary fervor and solidarity. What had previously been a collection of loosely affiliated provincial uprisings began to coalesce into a unified resistance movement with a shared cause: independence. More significantly, Bunker Hill revealed a critical need for structure, coordination, and leadership. The colonial response had shown courage, but it lacked cohesion. Recognizing this, the Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, took decisive action. On June 14, 1775, just days after the battle, it formally created the Continental Army. The next day, Congress unanimously appointed George Washington of Virginia as its commander-in-chief. Washington arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in early July 1775, confronting the immense task of transforming disparate militias into a disciplined and effective fighting force. As military historian Jonathan Bratton explains in conversation with Dan Snow, Washington's greatest genius through the entire war, and at Bunker Hill, was in keeping the army together and in keeping an army in the field. Under Washington's command, the Siege of Boston, which had begun informally in the wake of Lexington and Concord, intensified. For 11 months, the newly formed Continental Army maintained a strategic stranglehold around the city. British forces confined to the Boston Peninsula were entirely dependent on naval supply routes. Their isolation grew more precarious with each passing week. Washington's immediate challenge was logistics, specifically obtaining the heavy artillery necessary to break the British hold on the city. His leadership during this critical period would become foundational, not just to the siege, but to the eventual success of the American cause. The evacuation of Boston, a strategic American victory. After months of stalemate during the Siege of Boston, the deadlock was finally broken in early 1776, thanks to one of the most extraordinary logistical achievements of the Revolutionary War. Colonel Henry Knox, a former bookseller turned artillery commander, led a daring midwinter expedition to retrieve captured British artillery from Fort Ticonderoga. In an operation that spanned over 300 miles of icy rivers, snowbound trails, and frozen terrain, Knox successfully transported 59 cannons and heavy military supplies back to Boston. On the night of March 4th, 1776, under the cover of darkness, General George Washington's troops moved swiftly to fortify Dorchester Heights, a commanding position overlooking both Boston and its harbor. By dawn, British forces awoke to find well-placed American artillery threatening both their defensive positions in the city and their naval fleet in the harbor below. Faced with an untenable situation and the risk of either launching another costly frontal assault or seeing his ships destroyed, British General William Howe chose withdrawal. On March 17, 1776, now commemorated as Evacuation Day, more than 11,000 British soldiers, along with hundreds of loyalists, abandoned Boston and set sail for Halifax, Nova Scotia. The successful conclusion of the Siege of Boston marked a pivotal moment in the American Revolution. While the Battle of Bunker Hill had proved the colonists' willingness and ability to fight, the siege demonstrated something more: that the American forces, now organized as the Continental Army, could maintain strategic pressure and achieve tangible military objectives. What began as disorganized resistance had evolved into a professional force capable of challenging the British Empire and winning. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the American Revolution and the Battle of Bunker Hill, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to History Love. For more in-depth history documentaries, make sure to hit the notification bell and join us on the next journey through time.